Hi, everyone. I'm Neil Justin. I cover television and stand-up comedy for the Minneapolis Star Tribune. It's great. Thank you, Greg. Journalists never get applause. That is what a rare crowd. This is a great honor to introduce this panel and a subject that is dear to my heart. I know these folks care about it a lot, too. All of them are very established comics, both here locally and nationally. Tiffany Norton is well known here in the community, both for her work on the radio and local comedy, and I think she's opened the doors for a lot of new voices in the Twin Cities, particularly women. Greg Coleman is part of Minnesota royalty, as his dad is a beloved punter for the Vikings, but Greg has carved out his own career as one of the brightest and promising comics, I think, out of the Twin Cities scene in some time. He continues to perform here regularly, but he's also getting a lot of national exposure, and I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of him in the next couple years. And what can I say about Jackie Cashin, one of the most respected and smarted comics in the entire country, two terrific podcasts, and touring constantly. She is from Wisconsin, but she cut her teeth at Acme Comedy Club, and despite her huge fame, she still comes back to celebrate her relationship with Acme, and she's there this week, starting Wednesday to Saturday. I highly encourage you to go and check her out. So I'm going to open up with a few questions, but I really want this to be a conversation with all of you folks. So please be thinking of what you want to ask this esteemed panel, and we'll get started. I asked these guys last night, just to get things started, to think a little bit about comics that they admire or remember from when they were getting started, when they were kids, that may have struggled to adapt to the climate we're currently in. Tiffany, you want to start? Yeah. Did you come up with anyone?
Well, you know, it's funny. I was thinking about it. One of the people that inspired me the most to get into stand-up comedy that I just adored and I was not allowed to listen to in my home was Sam Kinison. And I had to, like, if you don't know who he is, he's an interesting guy. He passed in about 92. But his upbringing was that he was a reverend. He was raised in a family that did revivals. And so he was a preacher, and he was, as a closeted, fearful Catholic, I loved his irreverence for religion and the way that he just kind of attacked all of that stuff. So as impactful as that was to me, I was doing some research and I was like, yeah, but I bought, like, I have still some of his tapes and an old DVD, and I went back and watched it, and some of it is cringy. You know, there's so much I love, and then when you asked that question, I wanted to go back, and I didn't realize that he was boycotted back in the day because he included on one of his albums jokes about AIDS and jokes about gay marriage and homosexuality, and he was boycotted as well. Elton John came out against him. And so his response was, this is, you know, I don't feel that was the target of my joke. I made fun of drug addiction. I made fun of politicians. I made fun of religious people. I made fun of absolutely everybody on that album. I hear what you're saying, but that's my right as a comic. And I think we still have the same question today. And you don't think of Sam Kinison as being someone who was canceled, essentially, and boycotted at a lot of his stuff. So that was mine.
Oh yeah. Greg, anybody come to mind for you?
There's a comic who actually really helped me get started and was canceled. Tiffany Norton.
It's true.
Yeah, just quick side note, just to thank you, Tiffany and Miss Shannon. They pushed me into stand-up while we were doing radio. But I would say, like, influentials, albums. I used to sneak and listen to Red Fox albums. the party albums. You know, my parents, what do you listen to? You shouldn't be listening to that. But I was like, well, you have it. Like, I didn't buy it. I was a kid, and definitely like, you know, at 9 and 10, shouldn't be listening to that. But also, I just kind of think some of it is just the way of the times. You know, you look at Eddie Murphy, and Eddie Murphy even looks back at some of his stuff on Raw and Delirious. I mean, Eddie Murphy was the height of what Kevin Hart is, or whoever you consider, and even bigger at that time. But, you know, you go back and watch it now, like, oh, this doesn't age well. Even he'll say that. But also, even some material that I had from 10 years ago doesn't age well. And it's not supposed to if you have growth, because, you know, I feel like sometimes there's a difference in someone who's just up there telling jokes and a comedian. And if you kind of, I feel like it's a relationship. Like, you can say things to your family, but if someone else says it, you're like, yo, what are you doing? But within the confines of this show, if we create kind of a relationship and a back and forth, and you understand where I'm coming from, if I'm saying something that's, to raise an ear and to have a point, then fine. And then there are some times where it's just like, jokes are jokes. It's a throwaway thing. But yeah, so like the comics that inspired me, of course, when they were younger, was, you know, the Chris Rocks and the Chappelles. I was kind of right after that Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence swing. Those were my older cousins' inspirations. But I was like on Dave before the show, like back in the young comics of Aspen, when he would basically say when black people weren't fans of Dave Chappelle, they didn't know who he was. He was just a nerdy dude from DC. But I was like, I like that, because he had a different type of perspective. And now he's kind of the focal point and center point of what is canceled, what can you say, what can't you say. And I don't know, just kind of how I feel. We're independent contractors. You know, at some point, there are comics who say things who I might not like, I might not agree with, but do I agree with their right to be able to go out there and say it and to try to make a living? Yes, because everybody has the right to go to that show or not. I don't think, has anyone here been pulled into a comedy club and sat down? Until that happens, and until it's forced, like, hey, we're taking taxes away, like, just ignore them, you know, if you don't agree with what they got to say. So I guess that's my long-winded answer to that short question.
Jackie, who'd you come up with?
I just have to say that I'd like to force all of you to come see me at Acme. I'm dragging you off the streets. I never watched stand-up as a kid. It was we listened to sales stuff, Zig Ziglar. Anyway, but the first comic I ever saw live was Sam Kinison, and the comic that comes to mind, I mean, what both of them just said is that it's an independent contracting thing. Being canceled it just means you don't get booked. It's just a different kind of thing. Where the first person who came to mind when you were saying this is a guy named Doug Stanhope. And Doug Stanhope is occasionally very filthy and occasionally very button pushy, but is also incredibly gifted. I mean, and does sort of speak to power, you know, and speaks to, but he had a bad like 3 years when he would not stop doing jokes. He was going out with a woman who kept getting pulled over for drunk driving, and so he kept doing this anti-cop stuff that wasn't just overall, like I have an anti-cop stuff, or just to think about the cops. It's a think about the cop stuff, and just murder hornets, right? And but his stuff was weirdly very, you know, if it isn't, and this is entirely subjective, is when it isn't funny, you can tell. You're just like, I mean, some people do just want to hear rhyming curse words and then someone button pushing by calling someone else gay. that, I mean, it's not the greatest writing in the world. And everyone I know who's been canceled and is currently on tour, opening, doing arenas and Carnegie Hall, and there's the only punishment right now for being literally either a monster or an idiot is your fan base goes away. The person who I think of is Louis C.K., who I thought his stand-up was incredibly personal and very interesting and super smart and just vulnerable and great. And because he addressed like the darkest thoughts in his head. And then when the darkest actions of his body came out, he did not write a joke about it. So instead he got super defensive and claimed that it wasn't that big of a deal. And I am a woman, and I'm in my 50s, and so I have spent my entire life going, no, that guy's, you just don't want to be alone with him. He's all right. Just, stand by the door. And, which is insanity. I mean, there isn't a woman in her 20s or 30s who isn't like, no, that guy should be arrested. That's not okay. Let's call HR. Well, there's no HR in stand-up comedy. And so you just, word of mouth, and you're like, that guy's a douche. He's an elbow squeezer and an asshat. You don't want to be around him. But the only punishment of a guy like Louis C.K. that has occurred, because he's still hand over fist making cash, is his fan base has changed. It is no longer the hipster, very smart, very cool audience members. It's a bunch of incredibly defensive young men who are like, you should be able to do that. You should be able to do whatever you want. It's free speech. Free speech is all well and good, but I also have the free speech to tell you that you're an asshat. And then I get to walk away. I get to not be part of it. And if it gets super abusive, there's something called a hate crime law. And I'm in favor of that too, because it's not, and it's not my generation who created the hate crime law, but I actually, with everything isn't as clear cut. It is a line. It's a line graph. But yes. So free speech is all well and good, but the free speech of someone coming back at you and going, yeah, you're a frickin' monster, is also valid.
Well, to be fair, Louis C.K. did lose a lot of money.
Right.
money.
It's so sad that he's living check to check like he is.
But a lot of people turned against him because of what he did privately. In the case of Dave Chappelle, there are a lot of people that don't want you to go to his show here at Excel Center on Saturday, in part because
Wait,
they
you
want
guys,
to see
it's
Jackie.
on Saturday at the
Why would
Excel
you plug
Center.
him? Why would you plug his show above
Ticketmaster,
Jackie's?
you guys. No.
That cancellation worked. He's doing 18,000 seats
Yeah.
on Saturday.
The last time he was here, it was what? First Ave or whatever?
Yeah, they just sent him
First
to a
half
bigger
wouldn't let him
venue.
play there. He had to move to
Oh,
the
that's
varsity.
right. That's right.
And
He had to move to a bigger venue. That's right.
well, that brings up the point. Dave Chappelle will say he's been canceled, and as Jackie mentioned, he hasn't really
Right.
been canceled. Do you think he's been treated fairly? Do you think he's a victim, or do you think he protests too much?
A victim?
Yeah.
I do not
He sees
believe
himself
Louis
as a
C.K. as a victim.
No, Dave Chappelle.
Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle is a victim. Well, the weird thing about Chappelle and his stand-up, all stand-up is so subjective, right? So the weird hill that he wants to, like, his stuff about race is incredibly, as a middle-aged white lady, I have learned more from black comics and brown comics about racism, and the same is true about homosexuality and trans rights. I learn from those comics who are those people. And Chappelle's stuff about race is epically smart and beautifully crafted and super incisive. And his stuff about trans people is a 13-year-old dude. It's just dumb. It's dumbity-dum-dum, and it's a weird hill for him to die on.
Yeah. Agree with that sentiment. But as far as like the beautiful part about not being able to cancel, like it always bugged me when I see a title, "Cancel Comedian Dave Chappelle." Like, what was he canceled from?
Right.
And also the beautiful thing about our art form is, if you do have a fan base that'll support you, we're able to connect with our fan base via Twitter, via YouTube, via podcasts, and don't necessarily need corporate interests to support you. So Dave can do whatever Dave wants to do because his only tie-in is Live Nation. All they care about is ticket sales, and he gets it to them. In Netflix, and he gets views, and those are two both huge entities who are like
Giant corporate sponsorship.
Giant corporate sponsorship, but yet it's still you choose to come see us.
Yeah.
And you choose to come to our venue, and so he doesn't have to play the game. He can say whatever that it is that he feels, whatever he wants. Whenever people stop going to it, that's going to be the thing that's eventually going to turn. But like even on a smaller note, like Shane Gillis, he's a comedian who was up.
Yeah, tell people that story.
Okay. Yeah, he was a comedian who was up to be a writer on SNL, and he was popping around on the podcast and using an accent.
Performer, just
yeah,
writer?
or a performer.
Yeah.
Yeah, a performer got out, and so I'm like, hey, he made a race joke. And
a year and a half earlier.
Yeah,
whatever.
a year and a half earlier, and so they kind of took that away from him, and I feel like that made him more popular.
Right, but what I do like about the Shane Gillis story is that he didn't double down.
Yeah, he didn't double down. He admitted that. He
Right,
was like, yeah, I was wrong.
It was like that was a shitty thing to do.
But it didn't help him.
It did,
Yeah.
because a year and a half later, he didn't. What he said, and I don't know if he said this publicly or if I just heard a rumor mill among comics. He said, "I don't want that fan base.
Yeah.
I don't want those guys who are going to defend me for saying something that was not. It wasn't that funny, and it was super insensitive, and nobody."
But what I meant is he didn't get Saturday Night Live.
Oh, he didn't get Saturday.
Yeah.
Right,
Well,
but
I was like, that's a job though. So
Right.
for us, Saturday Night Live looks great.
it's just a gig.
Yeah, but it's just a gig, and at some point, it's a very hard gig, and you want Saturday Night Live to give you a bigger platform so you can have your own fan base, so you can tour what you want to tour and tour how you want to tour. He was able to skip that step because,
Right.
because as more people Googled, who is this guy? Who is this guy? And they had that one small clip, and he didn't double down. But then you were able to see everything else that he was doing, and you're like, yo, this dude's actually kind of talented.
He's a perfectly good comic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's some of the issue, and why a lot of times at bigger shows, people ask you to lock up the phone, or even if I'm on stage and I see someone record, I'm kind of like, come on, man, you know what I mean? Because it's not necessarily for everybody who's outside. If I want my jokes to be outside, yeah, there's no context. You could walk into a room, and I'm in the middle of a 7-minute bit, but you hear 20 seconds, and you're like, yo, what did he?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to go out and tweet, crack sack, but you didn't get the whole, the message. Yeah.
Oh, well, no, but to your point, like Ralphie May had an incident about that where part of his, he's a comedian, got some national exposure, very funny guy, and he had a bit about, he was in a casino and about Native Americans, and I don't think it's a great bit, but it was recorded and shared, and he suffered some definite fallout from that.
Well, I have bits from older albums that people question,
but it's out of context is the point. I guess I'm bringing it up because they walk in. If you listen to the whole bit, it's not that bad. But if you hear just what was shared, I guess, yeah.
Was he using weird words?
You'd have to go. No,
Okay.
you'd have to listen to it because
like
I'm
Washington football game.
Well, I'm remembering this from maybe 10 years ago, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I don't want to misquote or anything like that, but
Right.
I just remember that because I remember thinking the whole thing wasn't, well, it's not great, but.
You guys are in such a weird art form because, if you're an actor and you play Hannibal Lecter, you're Anthony Hopkins, nobody thinks you're an evil person. You're an actor, you're playing a role. If you're Stephen King and you write a book and you've got an evil clown, nobody thinks. Less
I
abuse.
actually think that Stephen King has got to be all screwed up inside. That's banana.
With the exception of Stephen King. But when you guys, Hassan Minhaj is in the news right now. He's probably going to lose the Daily Show gig because he admitted that he exaggerated.
He's too handsome anyway. So.
Exaggerated, made up some stories that he used in his monologue. And I wonder if, as artists, you ever think, I'm just an entertainer. I mean, I'm not a preacher.
I would
okay
agree
with
with
standard?
that. I would agree with that if all comics didn't write their own material, as opposed to actors and the material that you perform as a stand-up comic is the implication is that and even Hassan said that it was seeds of truth, and seeds of truth when nobody. Yes, someone got sent anthrax. It wasn't you. That is, the seed is planted way off of your field. That's someone else's farmland. You don't get to, just tell something that's real to yourself. You want to do a big picture, or you want to do something about, that, I understand what he was trying to do, but it wasn't, it was just too far off the farmland.
And I think the issue was if that was coming from a stand-up, because there is this expectation of, hey, you guys are supposed to be the beacon, the last of the truth when it comes to this in the art form. And so there's a piece of me that's like, yo, he did write this, and in our art form it comes across as, yo, like, that's a lie, why would you do that? But if he wrote that and turned it into a script, into a short, people would be like, "Oh my goodness, this is such a thing."
It's a format. It's that is judged differently.
Right, but do you remember Steve Rannazzisi, the hero of 9/11?
Oh, right. He made up that he was right.
Right. He is Comedy Central comic he's working all the chains. He's doing like the Improv and Heliums and House of Comedy, and he for 20 years he told people that he was in one of the Twin Towers. And he was on WTF about it. And then finally, the New York Times were like, you worked in Midtown. And so it all came out that he was lying, that he was in New York on 9/11. But he was not in one of the Twin Towers, and he was not anywhere. But for 20 years, he told that story. And not canceled. Vaguely not worked for about 3 weeks.
But the difference with him is I think
months.
it was a Brian Williams thing where he was trying to look. I don't think he used that for comedy, did he?
He used it to get podcasts. Like he used it to eat out on, right?
Okay.
So, I don't know.
He was in the identical Twin Towers. They're a different
The ones in Dubai.
A couple other things, and then I want to open it up here. Look, I'm not losing any sleep over Dave Chappelle. He's doing fine. Mm-hmm. What does concern me is if you were dumb enough not to go to Jackie's show and go see Dave Chappelle on Saturday, you're probably going to deal with some protesters. And I went to the last show at Varsity. They were mean.
The protesters were mean?
Yeah, the protesters. You're going to deal with some
Dave
blowback.
Mean? Was Dave mean at all?
Not to me.
Oh, on stage, though? He wasn't mean?
He talked about and he exaggerated what the protesters were doing.
Okay.
One thing I give Chappelle credit for, as opposed to Louis, is he deals with what's out there. He uses that. For better
he
or worse.
actually addresses it. Yeah.
But my point is, if you're a fan, and it's easy to say, hey, if you want to come to the show, come to the show. If you don't want to come to don't come to the show. But if you do come to the show in the climate you're in, you're a bad person.
Well, it depends on why you're going. You can't judge the intention. I don't know if anybody in the room is here because you guys want to hear us, or maybe you don't. Maybe you've seen me somewhere else and you don't like me.
You saw the free food,
and you just want to see
Tiffany?
me do poorly. You can't judge the intention of why someone engages with something.
Well, you are being judged. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a tough time for fans.
I want to back it off of comedy for just 1 second. As somebody who worked in radio and morning radio, and you're always looking for a zany promotion, right? And get everybody talking about you. Chappelle is a master, absolute master at that. He is what every program director in the United States would want for their morning guy. You want to pluck at people. You want to pluck strings. Why was Stern so wildly successful? When they found out that people who hated Stern listened longer than people who liked him, that was a really big window in our psyche, right? So a lot of the people that hate Chappelle bought tickets to be in the audience so they can boo who they don't like. Where else do we do this? Every Sunday at a football game. This is human nature, right? So Chappelle, not Chappelle, Chappelle's fine. Chappelle decided he didn't want to do stand-up anymore. Netflix was trying to make money. They said, hey, do you have any content? He said, I got 5 specials in a can I never sold. They're like, we'll buy them and give you $100 million. He's like, okay. This guy is the Forrest Gump of money. It just falls in his lap. You know, he's like, oh, COVID, well, I'll just do shows in my backyard and build a thing or whatever. He's fine. But imagine, like, I mean, I don't think he's doing anything. Nothing's being done to Dave that Dave is not enjoying, is my point. So.
Again, I'm more worried about the fan that's going to go to his show on Saturday.
That they're going to be judged?
Yeah.
Well, I mean.
But they might be going for that as well. They're like,
yeah, they might, yeah.
I'm going to go see, I mean that dingbat.
That's certainly true if you've gone to an Andrew Dice Clay show. Certainly, the people that go to his show now are making a statement.
Yep.
You know what? It's so funny about Andrew Dice Clay.
Dickory, sorry.
Hickory dickory, sorry. And please do that joke. I once had a 45-minute lecture from Jim Norton because I said that Andrew Dice Clay wasn't performing for me.
Oh.
I said I didn't like his stand-up very much because he wasn't actually performing for me. And Norton told me that I wasn't a real comic. And I was like, well, this seems like an unprovoked attack. Anyway, so whatever.
Hey, just to tap on what you said about not performing for me, I think everyone has that right, and sometimes you just got to exercise that right. And even as a performer, I know I'm not performing for everybody. I know if I go into a room and there's 100 people in there, and if I get 20 that really like me, like me, like we're gonna follow you. I mean, the rest of them can laugh,
right?
And like you enjoy the show. But I'm fine with that because at the end of the day, I know why I'm still doing this. And to kind of protect yourself, and I'm in a position where people are coming out, they're going to come out, whether it's me or the next person.
Oh, they're walking off the street?
Yeah, or they're just, walking off the street, just trying to be entertained.
Well, but when you're opening, that happens all the time. Someone's there for the headliner. They're not there for you.
Yeah, they're not.
They don't know you. They just like, oh, yeah, it's some guy.
You know Maria Bamford's line? She's like, I'm usually an assignment from a therapist. I'd like to be introduced as a melanoma survivor with an announcement. She's like, nobody in the audience is, there's 9 people that are psyched to see me.
Yeah, I just think that the exchange at a certain point, or maybe just mentally how I go through this, is just like, hey, this is exchange for goods and services. At the end of the day, you come in, you pay money, and I say something. If you don't like it, that's fine. And I don't have to care if you like it or not.
Do you think that stand-up comedy audiences are, I believe that they are the most tolerant people I've ever seen. For 35 years I've been doing stand-up comedy. I have sat, and Minnesota's a classic example of this. I will tell a joke, and the Minnesotans in the audience will go, no, I got it. I didn't like it. Tell another one. And they're literally, but they'll sit through the whole show going, all right. And then they'll leave, and because nobody ever checks before they go see stand-up. Like, would you ever go see a band hoping it was ska? No. You would check out what kind of freaking band you were going to see. Is it heavy metal? I like heavy metal. And then you show up and it's a big band. That's sad.
The exception is cruise ships. Those crowds are tough because a lot of them never been to a comedy club. They've got nothing else to do. But the other one that's relevant, and then I'm going to open it up here, but I'm curious to see what people think. We are on a college campus. And I know quite a few stand-ups who won't do college gigs anymore because the money's good, But the blowback that
Can
they
I
can
have
get,
those gigs? I'll do those. Are
Well,
you nuts?
I mean, the money.
The money's really good.
You guys will all do comedy shows.
Yeah,
college.
I'll do a hat store. I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm 2 days early for my show.
I'll perform at the Max.
But you guys know comics that won't do them anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, and two, that is their right as a comic, because sometimes you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're going to have to deal with extra stuff.
But what I'm saying, should they be in that position? Isn't college supposed to be a place where you can express different ideas and have a healthy debate about it?
Can I keep it real? Yeah, college kids, I love you guys. I just said kids, but sometimes comedians talk about things that you haven't experienced yet in life stuff. And so there's a lot of times where you get to hold a hard on to, this is what I feel, this is what I believe, and you haven't been compromised. And sometimes you might be watching a comic who's an old grizzled person who's had some who's had some compromise. And you can find the lightness and the funniness and the humor in it because there's been survival of that. Like comedy is, tragedy plus time equals comedy. And a lot of times with an older crowd, they've had that time and can see the comedy. Like even with myself, even if it's not controversial, right now I'm experiencing fatherhood. So I talk a lot about fatherhood. If I come to do a show at the university and talk about fatherhood, they're like, who is this? I don't know. Like besides a couple football players. But you know what I mean? So it's still the same thing. So it's not even necessarily like, it's just not for you. When I'm writing this joke, I'm not thinking like, yo, 26-year-old, 22-year-olds are going to love it. Like, but if, you know, like, I'm not Matt Rife. I wish I were.
Oh my God.
Oh God, I wish I were.
Cash cow.
Oh, I was just going to say, so kind of to your point, though, there is an age change, right? I mean, and it's not even about, you know, I mean, there's an age difference and their relatability. One thing, too, is when you're working on a college campus, though, it's more work and you don't get the fun club vibe of it's not overwhelming like love, you're being showered with applause. It's usually a little bit more stoic and you doubt yourself a lot in those sterile environments as a performer, and then you're like, you know what, I should have just studied here, I should have just stayed here, I should be in that seat watching someone else do this.
Well, and there are rules when you do different gigs, and it's not, the rules aren't the problem. I mean, when I play when I do a corporate, when I do a private, when I do a benefit, when it's not a club, even some clubs, there'll be rules. They'll be like, not too many F-bombs, we don't want to hear too much graphic sex and scatological nonsense. That, you know, there's certain rules. And when you do a college, sometimes they don't want to hear your UNICEF Indonesian bit because it's going to make somebody sad. And you're like, well, it wouldn't make them sad if it were funnier. So you're probably right, and you know, and I don't think there's any problem with there being sort of content rules in general. You know, with the thing with stand-up comedy is that everyone has to remember, and I put this in my corporate contract, is that at any level, it's still an adult sport. I opened for Brian Regan. There's 9-year-olds in the second row. I'm still talking about adult topics. I mean, the kids have a good time, but I only have 3 jokes about video games. You know, it's not going to be...
You have that new poop joke, though.
I got a new poop joke, you guys.
Another reason to go see Jackie this week.
Please come see my new poop joke. I've never had one before. Very exciting. But, as we all know from childhood, everybody poops. Remember that book?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that is an understanding, too, of sometimes when you come to places and they do have rules, they're there for a reason, because they have met comedians. like, please have rules. There are some times where I'm having a show, I was like, man, I wish I had a rule. I wish I told this person not to talk about it, because sometimes you will get a lot of people who say, oh, I should be able to say this, I should be able to do this, yada, yada, yada. But it's like, yeah, but you're not that good, so you're leaning on it. You know, so you also sometimes you got to check the source. Yeah, I mean, I guess my thing is I'm not afraid of any topics necessarily to talk about because I know myself. I trust myself, and sometimes I'm gonna run it. It may not go well, and I'll be like, all right, cool. I'll examine it. But there are very few times where it's like, you know what, I'm just gonna stick this in just to rub it in or just to make you mad. Then that's
that,
an that's an
that
exchange.
comic is not a good person.
Yeah, that's not a good person, and probably not necessarily a really good comic. So
Yeah, to your, exactly what you're talking about. The punching down, I think, is what you're talking. You know what I mean? Like when you're just being mean to be mean, you're already in a position of power. If you are on stage and you've got adults that have paid money to sit still, like, and you're a teacher at that point, basically, you're in charge. And I just hate it when I see comics, like, their jokes aren't going well, and then they start taking out on the audience right away. Like, it's the audience's fault. The audience did not prepare the material. You did. You did. You know, and the punching down. And I think that's where people get in trouble, is because as a comedian, if you're going to make fun of someone, you got a good subject right here. Start here, or make it personal in some way.
Right. There's mean comics who've been doing stand-up comedy for 30 years, and then there's new comics who don't know how to make people laugh yet, who are just throwing noodles at the wall to try to get something to stick. And the people I trust are decent comics who want to talk about really hard topics. Like, there are comics I know who do, like, trans jokes and jokes about race and jokes about sexuality and jokes about, like, everybody has a new they-them bit. And I have a they-them bit that took me 3 years to write, and every they-them in the world for 2 years came up to me and was like, I see where you're going, you're slightly off. And I heard that and changed it because I wanted to do the bit. And I knew that there were 3 punchlines that were great, and if I could get there without pulling everyone off of the page. You never read a book and it's so poorly written it pulls you out of the book? That you don't want that with a joke, where you're in the middle of the joke and you're like, everyone just goes, wait, what is she talking about? I want to get to the freaking punchline by the end of it, so if it's a sensitive topic, it has to be done correctly.
Well, and you listen to the feedback from the community, because you're not
most
trying
of
to.
it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you take it with a grain of salt too. You don't do everything everybody gives you. The suggestions your family gives you are great.
I want to open this up to folks who have questions. John, do you want them up at the mic in the center? Is that what that's there for?
Oh, it's an open mic. Come on up, guys.
Yeah.
2-drink minimum.
I had to write down my question. So. We know that historically comedy is a leveler of the high pressure, for the high pressure cooker that we have in society. From the Depression, Vietnam War, go on and on. Comedy lowers the high pressure that the cooker has. But today, what is it? Is comedy contribute to polarization? Is comedy still that leveler of high pressure, to bring down the pressure? But what is it these days? I don't know personally, who's listened to comedy all the way from Rickles to Hope to Dick Gregory. I can go on and on. And I have to ask that question of me now. I'd like to hear how you answer that.
Any thoughts? I certainly think when you said that, I thought about late night TV. That has those massive audiences. That definitely, I think.
And is over.
Yeah. And they went more political, right? I mean, Carson was never really. You never really knew where Carson's politics were.
CBS isn't going to replace Corden.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of done because it's been clipped out like that. But it is a great question. I think it's both because as in all media. Or I'll just go first, I guess. I'm sorry, but the all media is so pervasive right now that I think that some of it's been weaponized. It's been to polarize people and to make people join these certain camps of well, I only go see this comic because they talk about this, and I won't go see that comic because they won't talk about that. And then there's someone who's like, I need to see all the comics, and that's why I watch Rush Limbaugh, which is an old reference, and whatever. But it's, I think it is still a pressure relief, and when done correctly, it can nail it. It's beautiful. I mean, the old Colbert Show was one of my favorites, as far as being able to sort of, pressure relief.
There is something about ratcheting up the tension so high in a room where you can almost like just feel a pin drop. But when you can get that turn and you can get to that punchline and everybody goes, oh, I mean, I think anytime, I think we're all missing connection. And and you know, the thing I love is like the snort out of the woman who you knew did not want to come to the show, who was not supposed to laugh at that, and she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe," you know. And the release has to be there. And yeah, I mean, we can talk about the, you know, like the topic or content or delivery or manner or whatever, but you know, all of it is fluid. It's fluid. This is a different room. That'll be a different room. That'll be a different crowd. We'll all change. We'll all adapt, and you'll be different for the experience, and we'll be different from it too. You know.
I do agree that comedy still does have that ability, especially that pressure cooker. Like, I mean, truthfully, those are some of my favorite moments. You know, when the country is tense, and it's you go in and you talk about it, and I love dancing in that, and building that pressure. One, because I know that there's a release that's gonna come, and two, just personally, it makes you memorable. It makes you kind of remember that comedian, because you guys are gonna sometimes forget what they say, but you're gonna remember how they make you feel. So I believe that comedy as the art form is still that, and still does have it. I just think the biggest thing is just how comedy is released. Comedy is not released the exact same way as the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when, you know, Hollywood was like, hey, this is who to pay attention to. This is who it is. There's still that at some course, but if you're in a certain type of comedy, you'll be able to find it if you want to work for it. It's kind of the same thing that is happening with music at a certain point in the early 90s, when people are like, oh my gosh, it's so explicit. You got 2 Live Crew and NWA and all of it looks like this. Yeah, but on the other side, you still got KRS-One. You still have A Tribe Called Quest. You still have the Jungle Brothers. So at some point, you got to examine what you're attracted to. Are you attracted to controversy? Are you attracted to want to have water cooler talk? Or are you going to put your attention to, yeah, they can go talk and say whatever they want to say. I'm going to go rock over here. I know that there's Klan meetings happening. Am I going to go back, oh my God, there's Klan meetings happening? Or am I going to just go pay attention to something else I want? Do I hope that this gets out or whatever? But also take some personal responsibility and find what you're looking for. It is there, and that's the golden age of why we're kind of in this new golden age of comedy right now, is because you can go find exactly what you're looking for. There are comedians who are selling out 3,000 seat arenas, who I have no idea who that is.
Right.
No idea.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, that wouldn't happen because we only had 5 outlets. Now there's a million plus. So that's also a bit on the consumer. Find what it is that you like and just go rock and support with that. You know.
Let me challenge that a little bit, and adding to this political divide thing. One thing I wonder about is the lack of conservative comics doing political, edgy stuff from a conservative standpoint. There are comics that attract a lot of conservative audience. Larry the Cable Guy, Jeff Foxworthy. They don't really do political stuff. Greg Gutfield, who's not really a comedian, has had a huge success on late night television by doing political humor from a conservative standpoint. And I do wonder if we live in our liberal bubble and we think, oh, everybody should be open to everything. But there's not great comics doing conservative, edgy stuff from my viewpoint. Maybe you folks know some, but...
who are you going to find funnier than the actual politicians?
True.
You know, like
Lord Mover is killing right now in theaters.
Truth, you can't. Name me someone who can have the scathingest Trump joke. It's not going to be funnier than watching Trump say whatever he had to say or whatever he had to do. And at some point, too, if you're playing the game, and I'll notice this too, like there's such a divide. Everyone wants, well, either you're this or either you're that. Chris Rock said it best back in the day. Some things I'm liberal about, some things I'm conservative about. If you want to talk about like, hey, I kind of agree on something like this that may be a bit more conservative and you're saying it in Minneapolis, like you got to be able to hold on to that and rock with it. But also too, if it's funny enough, if you want to break down some of my stuff, some of it sounds conservative. But I make it funny. If you go back and listen to Martin Lawrence and a lot of things like that, he was saying conservative. Like, look at the show. Go watch the show. He's conservative, tight with his money. You believe man, woman, stuff like that. But we're like, oh, it's Martin. You put it in a thing. But, I mean, it is what it is. And I believe they have the right to do it. Because I don't want everybody over here in this pot. You need options. Because if there's options, people who are going to come to your show will be like, oh, I don't need this. Oh, go to that show.
Well, and also for me, how do you define? Someone's like, well, you're a giant liberal, and I'm like, because I think everyone should live inside. I don't think that makes me a huge liberal. I don't know what conservative comedy would. I mean, if it's the talking points of the far right agenda, that doesn't feel conservative to me. That feels literally Nazi, fascist. And I'm like, and if you can make that funny about, just people dying on the streets, I don't know how you're doing it, because most people are just, I mean, the stuff that talks about homelessness and talks about racism and talks about sexism and talks about whatever and makes it funny at all. There's a guy named Tim Dillon. Is that his? Mm-hmm. He's got a bee in his bonnet about high school kids who are transgender, and he's working on a bit about it. I've seen him do it twice, and all it looks like from this early days is him beating up on high school kids, and you're like, I don't know how you're gonna make that funny, man. But you got the right to try. One couple walked out, but they also had the right to frickin' walk out.
Well, I don't think Tim Dillon's really going to make it funny. He's just going to make it loud.
Right, he might just shout it.
He's not a good comedian.
There's not a lot of great comedians out there, you guys. There's a lot of comedians.
Yeah, well, to the conservative thing, I think what I see is the more conservative space is occupied by what you would call like the blue collar comedy tour. I mean, it's more that is kind of.
But they're not doing political stuff. They're doing family
but
stuff.
They're not. But it is also under the family values guys, and there's a certain undercurrent to it that there's, that it's small town, and that they're talking to. Because I mean, really, when you're talking about the difference between like liberals and Republicans, really what those are. That's kind of a label, right? But really what we're talking about, I think, is socioeconomic differences. Poor people versus people that are wealthy, right? And so a lot of times liberal politics gets associated with elites and wealthy people. And now the Republican Party, which is strangely not the party I remember growing up with, but that's now being associated more with poor people if you're from a white socioeconomic background. Which is strange because it's not really, it's not in your best interest. But so I think the smart comedians, I think there are conservative comedians out there, but they do it under the guise of more of a blue collar approach. I can think of a couple of names, especially people that I'm trying to think of the one guy, but he does. Carolla? Adam Carolla? No. There was, obviously you got your Ron White and people like that, but no, well, Joe Rogan, no, that's a bro. He's bro comedy, but I guess that would be my say. I think that there's there, but no, as far as conservative voices, and plus a lot of comics, let's be honest, we'd run them out of town if they came in singing the praises of Trump. I mean, most comics.
That's an excellent point. Is that fair?
I mean, like off stage. I know a lot of people. You guys know at Acme a couple of people. I'm not going to call anybody out that are pretty hot and heavy towards the right, but they're not really doing that on stage. But the comics all give them crap about it off stage, So there's a checks and balance for sure.
By the way, if you have a question
on a lot of stuff,
just step up to the mic so we know that there's a question. I'll give an example of a comic that I think is pretty good, that I don't think gets his due. You guys may disagree. It's Rob Schneider. Now I've seen him I saw him. He had built up an act, an anti-Hillary Clinton act. That had nowhere to go when Trump won.
Did it start with bitches, man? Is that how he opened it?
Right. Yeah. Is that his opening?
Isn't that Elle King's dad?
Yes, it is.
It is. I know. I was trying to relate. This is Elle King. You've heard of her, actually, but not probably Rob Schneider. Yeah, I know.
But I think his stand-up is pretty good, but he's not very well respected. Yeah.
That is true. Sorry.
I think some of you have said if they don't like it, they can go somewhere else. That makes sense to me. And some of you have said comedy needs to be very personal. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the controversy that's going on with Hannah Gadsby, whom I think is just brilliant. I love her stuff, and I think she's awesomely funny. But Dave Chappelle, who would say, if you don't like it, go somewhere else, is really coming down on her and saying, oh, she's not funny, she's not doing comedy, don't go. There's a big fight happening between the two of them. I don't know if you're aware of this.
Chappelle is saying that to Hannah's fans?
He's saying in his own show that she's not funny, that she shouldn't be saying that she's doing comedy. So,
Well, thank you for the question there. I don't know. I didn't hear the quote. Do you guys know more about this then?
All right, so this is a practice what you preach. I had a friend of mine, and we socially a little bit different, and it just kind of had to get to a point of like, yo, you know what? That's not for me. The first time I saw her special, someone was like, you gotta watch it. It's the greatest thing ever. And I was like, I've known you for 15 years. You've been to one of my shows, and you're telling me to watch like, someone else.
Yeah, that's always
so
annoying.
you already put the stack against it. And then when I watched it, it wasn't necessarily presented as what in my head of, oh yeah, stand up. It felt kind of like one-manish.
A storyteller.
Or a storyteller. But then I just kind of had to get to the point of just like, all right, well, yo, she's doing something that's connecting with people who she rock with. I'm not going to like...
Yeah, there's like Birbiglia does storytelling stuff.
Yeah,
Hannah Gadsby does storytelling stuff. There's 1,000 one-liner guys, which are, I mean, is that the only kind of stand-up? I mean, that's the thing, is that when anybody defines what stand-up is, it's sort of like alcoholism. You just have to, if you claim to be a stand-up, you're a stand-up. And I say that's fine. You know, it is weird when one comic bosses another comic about what they're doing.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any... I was like, the only person you kind of get to boss is the person who opens for you if it's your show. Then you get to say, if you could not do any crowd work, that'd be great. If you could not swear too much, that'd be great. Scott Hansen used to, I don't know, he used to say...
Bring your own mic.
No, his whole thing was the first weekend of hunting season, he was like, no one else can do any hunting jokes. I'm doing all my hunting jokes. And we all looked at each other and said, we have like one hunt. Nobody has any hunting jokes. Scott, do whatever you want. And
That's mine. I've cornered it.
Yeah, it's hard with the boss around. I do think a little bit too, but like when you look at it, like Gerard Carmichael in his last special, like it was very much different than his first two, which were kind of like jokey, and this one was more slow pace and more walkthrough. And like at my heart of hearts, those are some of my favorite performances to do when you're able to be that vulnerable. So then you got to kind of look at Hannah and be like, yo, she was able to do it. I just think the rub was it felt like she kind of came out of nowhere. And then everybody else saying like, yo, you got to do this. It just felt like, this is America. This is our thing, fam. Like, you got to... We don't know what dues you paid, like a little bit with...
Right, she was from Australia. It's not like she hadn't been doing stand-up for 15
HBO,
years.
John Oliver.
Right.
Like a little bit when everyone's like, oh, John Oliver is the greatest, or Trevor Noah. Like, it was still just a little bit of like, yo, who's this dude over here? And like showing the lens on us. So like that was that, but like I respect it. I don't necessarily care what Dave guys say.
Oh, okay.
I hope you're not saying that comics can be xenophobic, and if they come from Australia or from South Africa, well, who are they? I don't want to get into what they're doing. I don't think you're saying that.
No,
But I also going back to the storytelling bit. Who's a storyteller? Bill Cosby, whose name should not be mentioned. When it was not known all of the horrible things that he'd done, and when he was at the height of his popularity, he's a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and he's a comedian.
Yeah.
Nobody would say he wasn't.
No,
Yeah.
so what we were saying was the presentation and just what we would talk about of comics. Like, hey, I don't have any beef about it. It was my context of how it was introduced to me. It was introduced to me from a person who I've known personally.
And who's never
then
seen you. Has only
never
just
seen me. Hey, you need to go see this. You need to go see this. And I'm like, I haven't heard anything about this. And then so the first watch, I was, okay. But see, that's 8 years ago. You ask me now, hey, how do you feel about Hannah? Oh, she's doing her thing. She's serving. It is
I
what it
would like
is.
to define stand-up comedy as Stephen Wright one-liners.
Yeah,
and that
very
is it.
low.
It's impossible.
Well, and it's I just want to, and I just kind of, maybe I'm taking it the wrong way too. But this is another instance where there's a guy comic saying a female comic isn't funny, and I could just roll out the carpet for that one. For God's sakes, you know what I mean? Like, oh, don't go to her. Well,
No, I
that's
get
just
it.
it. I mean, I was watching the documentary on Carlin not that long ago, and Cheech Marin said in public that he was over, that he was irrelevant. Carlin. So there's always someone saying someone shouldn't care about something else. And here's the thing. I know who Hannah is. Hannah's not for the same audience as Chappelle. She's not, and women who are not trying to get laid by men, they're clearly not trying to like have that energy when they're on stage. I mean, no one, I don't think any female comics really are, but when they're kind of saying this show isn't for you, then people get mad. What do you mean it's not for me? You know, and that's kind of like, no, she's not playing to you, Dave. She's not even trying to be even in your wheelhouse with any of that kind of stuff. But like Jerry Lewis, women will never be funny, Dave Mordahl told me a woman is only as funny as the guy that she is having, the comedian she's having sex with, So it's just, right? I mean, and see, he laughs. So you see what I'm saying? And it's
My
fine
eyes
to do
have
it.
become very big.
And it's fine to do it. Go. That was my take on it, yeah. There's
And
always
as far
someone
as
crapping
the-
on someone else's stuff.
And as far as the xenophobia thing, like, no.
He's
that was
super
just-
xenophobic. He
super.
won't even go. Yeah, he won't come to St. Paul. I
Oh,
live there.
Canada.
He won't come.
Watch him walk
He
out.
will not.
If
This
I
is the
start
first
singing
time he's
No
been in
Canada.
St. Paul in years.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I do appreciate that it riles up because that's something that like we like. This is a special thing, and just half of that was just a little bit of like inside, like, yo, who's this person? You like shining the light on us, like you're like, yo, who? Yeah, well, yo, calm down. Like,
Just
this is what we
it's
do.
humanity.
Yeah,
It's always
it's just
surprised that someone is doing something somewhere and you've never heard of them.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. So that's
yeah.
like all that was is just like, oh man, like
Yeah.
we feel so entrenched, and then all of a sudden there's a huge Netflix special, because also this is a bit of how media was changing for us. And like I said now, or like I said before, there's comics who are doing 3,000, 4,000 seats, and you have no idea who this person is. So it's a little bit of that same thing.
There's definitely an old guard mentality of if you did not pay your dues and we haven't seen you do the work, we're not co-signing this. Are you a TikTok? Are you a fad? Did someone write that for you? Is it a monologue? We are. I mean, we're jerks about it. We give up our relationships, our 401ks, our families, our health, our looks, our talent, like everything to do this job. And so, yeah, if someone shows up, just slides in and like, hey, here's my card. I just started 3 weeks ago and I'd like to open for you. No.
And even if they have done it, and John Oliver also talked about that, of when he came over to America, of how he had to deal with a lot of people of like,
Yeah.
yo, fam, who are you? Like, you got
Yeah.
an HBO show? Like, you
Yeah.
haven't, like,
We didn't
what
see you at
dues
the
have you
mic.
paid? And so, like, there are blind
Dues
spots
can be paid
too.
elsewhere.
Yeah, they
It's
can
fine.
be paid.
Right.
They can be paid elsewhere.
Right.
Incoming.
Dr. Miller?
That code is amazing.
I know.
I am absolutely blown away by all of you. This is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And I like the way you framed it.
Sure.
What?
What's that? Wasn't
and I like the fact that you're not shying away from who you are as comics. So I haven't been to see any of you, but I want to.
Hey.
I want you to know that.
Oh, Wednesday
So
through
I intend to.
Saturday.
I
Yes.
intend to. The question I have for you, and feel free not to answer it if you don't want to.
Oh.
When Al Franken lost his seat in Congress because of something he had done as a comic, what impact did that have on your profession, if any? Or how did you
First of all,
how did you feel about it?
It was the low back thing. Is that what it was?
No,
it was the
that
low
was
back.
that was Garrison Keillor.
Right.
Oh, he was the low
No,
back.
Franken was
Franken was
No,
he was on an airplane.
No, Garrison was actually sleeping with people.
Well, that too.
But I
Al
thought
was
Franken
touchy-feely.
was like that.
I
Oh,
thought Al
There was
Franken
a
was a little bit-
photograph. He was on. There was a.
I think that the downfall was when he posed for pictures with women, his hands were in places they shouldn't have been.
There was a photograph of a woman who was traveling. They were doing a tour. They were doing stand-up, and they were overseas. And on the flight back, there was a female on board who was in like a jumpsuit, and she was asleep. And they took a picture of her with his hands like that. Not cool, right?
Oh, like not
cool.
touching her, but
But not touching her,
like
though,
a
right?
13-year-old Jack.
Exactly.
See, again, I'm 100 years old. And I'm like, oh, he's just an idiot. And but it was
not cool.
no, not cool. But Jimmy Dore, who did he? He grabbed some woman's boobs and said, "Could you imagine if I were this guy?" And she said, "You just grabbed my boobs. You are that guy." And he goes, "Yeah, but I was just kidding."
Right.
And she was like, "Yeah, but you literally just grabbed my boobs and said, what if I were this guy?" And he did that 5 months ago. So feel free to cancel Jimmy Dore, is what I'm
Okay.
saying. We'll
Well,
put him on.
I'll say this about Franken and how all that has affected him, even just as a comedian. And very selfishly, everything that he went through affected me positively because I worked with Al Franken last year at Acme, and
Oh, cool.
I got paid by the club, and he paid me extra.
Oh, nice.
You know why? Because he's a
You're going to
liberal.
get his vote. You can't do that. He's buying
Yeah,
votes.
but
Okay.
then so
He just bumped you because
Yeah,
his feature pay is feature pay.
yeah, and so there's some of that of
The fact that he's back doing stand-up
yeah,
is a
he's
win.
back doing stand up and he's selling out. Like there are sometimes when it's like it's a moral compass. Sometimes you have the right to do it, but sometimes too, I got a bill, I gotta pay diapers, I gotta buy diapers, and I'm doing my set. We are at a club, and hopefully that there are rules and things like that in place.
Oh my God,
and
I went up
personally,
at
I don't know. I didn't follow.
I was at the
Franken thing that much.
stand last year, and I went up between Tim Dillon and T.J. Miller.
Yeah.
And T.J. Miller, if you don't know, T.J. Miller's canceled and performing all over the country. And he is, but he's out
Not
of
in
his...
Transformers, though.
Right, and he got kicked off a
Yeah,
Deadpool,
Deadpool.
movie. But he literally, he hit on some woman on a
Subway.
train, and she said no, so he called the FBI and said that she had a bomb in her purse. So he's genuinely unstable.
Yeah.
But and he has substance abuse problems and is using it as a stick to beat off.
And most tragically, not funny.
T.J. Miller.
Yeah. You think his stand-up's funny?
I thought he was occasionally funny, but I have
We
I
work
have
with
favorite-
sociopaths.
There's so many comics that aren't very funny that are hugely popular.
Yeah.
I mean, Russell Brand just got accused of sexually assaulting or raping 4 women, and he's not fun. I mean,
No,
that guy's mediocre. And what's the greater sin? Oh, I'm a jackass. Okay, so yeah, it's bad.
I guess.
I was just going to say about Franken, just real quick. In that instance, when that happened, it was something that he did while he was on tour, and I think it was after Saturday Night Live, and it was before he was in Congress, right? Yes, and so it was when he was a civilian that this picture was taken. It hit the fan, and he resigned. That was his choice to do, which I thought was a really classy move. I didn't think he necessarily had to. Nothing that he did necessarily rose to the level of legal. But the reason why it came to the light was because the woman that he had done it to had shared on a podcast that she was really made to feel uncomfortable because she thought she was one of the guys, and then when she was asleep, they did this. And I have felt that way in the presence of other guys too. So like we all have problems with boundaries. We don't have HR and all that kind of stuff. But no one would want the job, right? Because they would have to answer the phone 24/7. But again, I guess what I was just gonna say is, it seems like when men get canceled, they don't get canceled for very long. But when Roseanne gets canceled, she's canceled. When Kathy Griffin gets canceled, she's canceled. Like, it sticks more. I think that we are very unforgiving for a woman who falls from grace as opposed to a guy comic. That's just my take.
Woo! Tell her how it is, Tiff.
Well, I'm just saying I'm sick of it. It's kind of annoying. We have an even higher bar than the other bar.
Well, I
You
mean,
know.
it's it's true. I mean, I guess it needed to be said because nobody said it, but I mean, I think it's an obvious thing, right? I mean, it's just like saying Barack Obama couldn't have been president if he wouldn't have also been the smartest guy in the room, but also squeaky clean. You know, he couldn't just be the smartest guy in the room.
An attractive man over the height of 6 feet tall. You know, like a prototypical leader. You know,
he had to
definitely
right, but
hot.
And so
Sorry.
it had to be.
I
think you said a thing that needed to be said, Tiff.
Sasha, Malia, Bo.
Any last question? I think we have time
Sorry.
for one more question. What about some of our college students? I'm curious what kind of comedy you guys listen to.
Yeah.
And what you think of the state of stand-up. When I was in college, I don't think I went to a stand-up show until I was a senior. Maybe.
It just on TikTok. What's the longest clip you've watched?
Yeah. Wow, now.
Oh.
With the late Kanye West.
No, and didn't
It's
Nick
quick.
Cannon get in trouble for that too?
It's quick because this is also too like a generational thing. Like you guys have, like stand up was introduced to me through like HBO and Dave Letterman, and your generation, it's introduced to you on your phone. Mm-hmm. It's on your phone and it's 60 seconds or less.
And I got to say, I worry about that, and this is a longer discussion, but I think a lot of the comics that you guys watch on TikTok and are social influencers, you guys go out to see them, and they don't have an act.
Yeah,
I mean, they're good in like 15, 20 seconds, and then you guys think that's stand-up comedy, as opposed to seeing these guys who have an hour of practice material.
Yeah, but the thing is, too, we can't necessarily get like mad or frustrated at them.
I feel bad for them.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, too, like, it's stand-up comedy and funny is getting blended because, like, you know, like funny is the byproduct of stand-up. But right now, you can go on the internet. Oh yeah, I love this stand-up. He's a comedian, and it's like, oh no, he's a TikTok person. He doesn't have jokes, and like they'll all do that. Like they'll go like DC Young Fly, Desi Banks.
Wasn't Angela Johnson the first YouTube famous?
Like basically everybody from Wildin' Out, mostly everybody on Wildin' Out, it started out as stand-ups, and now it's a lot of social media influencers. And then when they try to come over to the stand-up world, it's a hard hit because we have expectations of, oh no, you need an act. And you'll see a lot of them like, yo, when I went out, I wasn't funny. HaHa Davis will say he wasn't funny during stand-up at the beginning because, you know, you got to learn that it's an art form. So eventually it's going to grow because the people that you guys like, who you'll see on like influencers, and then they turn into stand-ups. At some point down the line, they'll turn into stand-ups, and you guys can follow.
Yeah, it just takes a year.
And and when you guys are older and have kids, you'll look at your kids and be like, back in my day, stand-up was 60 seconds. You know what I mean? Like, and they'll be watching, like, go back to Vine. Like, so it's all how you consume it. And the game is changing. It's not going to be what it is. You just got to make your decision. I've tried to make a decision. Yo, I want to try to get some younger fans. Am I going to do TikTok and stuff like that? But I know in my heart, I'm more long form. It doesn't really work out like that for me. So instead of chasing something that's not for me, right now, I'm enjoying what I do and who I do it for and whoever comes and sees me. So you're going to have consequences.
You're
whether
like a
you can
damn
chase it or
role
not.
model. Greg,
it's
like you're Captain America.
Oh, I mean,
all right. Do you brush your teeth after your set?
I brush them before. I'm one of those comics who brings a toothbrush either in my back pocket.
He's always been a prop comic.
Yeah.
I know we've got a couple other great panels coming up, so we need to wrap it up. I want to thank this fantastic panel. And for those of you who have not been to a comedy club before or haven't been in a long time, I really urge you to go out. And we have such a great comedy scene here in the Twin Cities. I think the comics would agree, top three or four in the country. And I really think it's probably the hardest entertainment form there is. And it's really a great night, and it's a lot cheaper than going to concerts or theaters. So I encourage you to go out and experience not just these comics, but all the great comics that are coming through town. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Go see Jackie. Go see Jackie this weekend.